Continuing on, episode number 98 of the Primetime Rundown. Joining us here on our next edition of the NFC West preview show, host of the PHNX Cardinals podcast and Arizona Cardinals reporter, Bo Brack. Bo, thank you so much for joining us here on this Monday evening and Monday late afternoon, or actually early evening where you are out west. How are things on your side of the country?
They're great, man. I'm excited to talk to Joey and Mike.
Yeah, it should be tons of fun. And, there's so much to talk about out in the desert because obviously Kyler Murray has a brand new contract. There was so much to talk about there. Hollywood Brown got arrested. He's in. He's Kirsten Kirk is out. DeAndre Hopkins, we know he's out for 6 games. The defense had a little bit of a surprise today, and Devin Canard, Giants legend, of course, on our side, he was released because from what Ian Rappaport reported that the young kids are going to be given some opportunities. So there's a ton to talk about here today on our Cardinals preview. And Bo, I want to start off with the first thing here. Kyler Murray, brand new contract. He erased a lot of his social media stuff regarding the Arizona Cardinals. Everything that he had on there was wiped off clean. Start fresh, I guess. And then all of a sudden, a new contract comes in. What have you seen in camp so far with him now that obviously the preseason's over, but I'm sure he looks good.
He does look good when he's been on the field. He's dealt with COVID. He dealt with kind of an arm fatigue early on. So there was a little lull there as far as getting him on the field after kind of a quick start. Never saw him in a preseason game. So it's been actually, a very subdued, quiet training camp for Kyler Murray and the stars on this Arizona Cardinals team, the guys that are expected to be big impact makers. We just haven't seen them. You mentioned Hollywood Brown. He was going 126 miles per hour, allegedly, on his way back to meet up with the team to go to training camp practice. It's been a very drama-filled offseason and lingering into training camp and preseason. This team is excited, I think, chomping at the bit to actually get back on the field and play games that mean something. But, look, you've got Kansas City right out of the gates, and that's a daunting game at home. But so you just paid your franchise quarterback money. He's going to have to show up. And despite not seeing much time this training camp and preseason, he's going to have to show out too. So it's going to be huge for him. I think he's ready. Nobody knows this offense better than Kyler Murray. He's been in the system now. This is his 4th season. He's known Cliff Kingsbury since his high school days. He should know this thing backwards and forwards. And I think he's got the most impressive crop of offensive playmakers that he's ever had before. So, excited to see, what it looks like come September 11th.
Mike, take it away.
Yeah, so thanks once again, Bo, for coming on with us. I think a big thing, really, I'll start off with is, of course, we mentioned all the drama. Of course, DeAndre Hopkins going to be out too for 6 games and whatnot. Is this really, on the coaching side of things, given everything going on and whatnot, is this really a do or die year for Cliff Kingsbury to really get this team through the playoffs, win a game or two, and to really take a step forward with this team? Otherwise, does the Cardinals front office just say, just not working out, time to move on?
I mean, he signed a 5-year extension this offseason, but we know at the NFL that it's, what have you done for me lately? So if they fall on their face, if they take a big step backwards, then, I think they'll probably reevaluate things. I don't think that makes him, Teflon. But look, I mean, this is a team ever since Cliff Kingsbury took over the reins along with Kyler Murray at quarterback. They've improved each and every year as far as the wins department. They've improved by at least 2.5 wins each season since he took over. One of the craziest is, ascents to a head coaching position in NFL history. He was fired from his alma mater at Texas Tech, and he finds his way as a head coach in the NFL, which is wild. But, the offense improved. They were horrible in 2018 before he took over. It was like Jurassic era stuff that they were doing, and he's taken them, into a modern day NFL offense. They've improved in every major statistical category, including, developing that young quarterback. Kyler Murray is a 2-time Pro Bowler. So, are they going to have enough without DeAndre Hopkins? They certainly took a step back when he was not in the lineup at the end of last year. Down the stretch, he dealt with, a couple different injuries, hamstring. He had to have his knee cut into. He looks like he's healthy, but you've got the 6-game hit that he took for the PED violation suspension. They brought in Hollywood Brown. They drafted Trey McBride in the 2nd round, the top tight end in the class. I think they believe that they can get back to more of the team that started 7-0, 10-2, and be firing offensively. in the meantime before Nuke gets back in the lineup come week 7. So it's going to be up to Kyler Murray to kind of take on that burden, but he's certainly capable of doing it. He's come out of the gates hot the last 2 seasons. I don't see anything different this year.
Let's move also over to Devin Canard, of course. The big news today, of course, that he's been released. They want to give more playing time toward the younger players in that position. Is that really prudent in your mind, or what's the state of the position there in general that feel that they have this much depth that they can move on from a veteran?
Yeah, it's an interesting move. I mean, Devon Canard was a guy who came over a couple years ago from Detroit on a pretty lucrative free agent deal. His dad played for the PHNX Cardinals back in the day, so there was a history here, and he was coming off like a 7-sack season, and he dealt with a couple injuries, and he just never was productive as a pass rusher for this team. And they released him earlier this offseason, brought him back kind of on a restructured deal, and he kind of was a placeholder for the pass rusher opposite Marcus Golden. And that used to be Chandler Jones. I mean, he exited on a lucrative free agent deal with Vegas, who the Cardinals will see in week 2. But it was really it wasn't like his job to lose. It was just going to be the best players were going to play. And they figure that this rotation, which was, it's deep. I mean, it's, Dennis Gardeck, a guy who's known for his special teams prowess. He had 7.5 sacks and less than 100 pass rush attempts in 2020. They hope he can get back to that kind of status. They like this kid out of Duke. He was a former 6th-round pick, Victor Dumakaji, who flashed in the preseason. And then you got 2 third-rounders, one that came over in the Hollywood Brown trade, and Cameron Thomas and Majay Sanders, who played at Cincinnati, who was a Final Four team for college football last year. They like these guys, and I think they figure, look, we're going to run with the young guys and have that rotation, and then figure out who the hot hand is. And Devon Canard just was going to have a tough time cracking that. They didn't want to kind of waste any snaps on a veteran they feel like they already know about. So they're just going to move forward and feel like the grass is a little bit greener on the younger side of the yard here. So we'll see. I think that it's probably the smart move. I'd kind of seen the writing on the wall for Canard before the final preseason game, just playing the numbers game. It's just like they can't carry 6 pass rushers is I know they want to just flood the position by numbers, but you have to kind of know what you have now and to move forward kind of regular season time. So I don't think the rotation's set, but they figure who's going to be in that rotation. It just didn't have Canard in the mix. So it was surprising, but it wasn't the most shocking of all releases. It's maybe he'll catch on. And he's a guy that, guys, I don't know if like football is his number 1 priority anymore. He's, dipped into real estate. He's a lot more, I guess, well set for life after football than these other guys. So he should be fine. It was, but it was a little shocking.
Yeah, absolutely. And now flipping back to the offensive side of things, going back to Hollywood Brown, keep in mind, Hollywood and Kyler played at Oklahoma. Keep that too, and a lot of people don't know that. They were collegiate teammates as well for a couple of seasons. So, obviously now with Christian Kirk out, we brought that up before, Hollywood Brown in, Christian Kirk signed that big deal in Jacksonville. Do you feel that, even though that obviously, and no one can really, there's no comparison to what DeAndre Hopkins brings on a day-to-day basis, especially on the field, game day, whatever it may be. He's one of a kind, but instead of, let's just say, for instance, Hollywood was not brought in for the trade, and D-Hop was suspended anyway, and they did re-sign Christian Kirk, whatever the case may be. Is this the better scenario, I guess, that they've got, or that Kyler has someone that he is familiar with? Again, if they did lose Kirk and they didn't bring in Brown, they would be left with, I'm just trying to think.
What they had last year.
Yeah, exactly. I'm just thinking Andy Isabella. There's another couple that I'm still missing, but that would be really, really tough for Kyler Murray, and he'd have to be using his legs a whole ton. So this is obviously a really good move, but is there that little extra security blanket because he's played with him before?
Yeah, no doubt about it. I mean, we've heard from both of them this entire training camp that they're familiar. They work out together, regardless of what team they were on before this. they were working out in the offseason. And Cliff Kingsbury is kind of like, I don't know if you could call him a four-man Lincoln Riley anymore, but like they run similar systems. You know, what Lincoln, before he moved on to USC, what he was running at Oklahoma with Kyler Murray and Hollywood Brown, they're kind of running this similar concepts here in the desert. And so they're going to pick up where they left off with, a couple of years of pro experience under the belt. And Hollywood Brown comes over. He had the first 1,000-yard receiver season for Baltimore Ravens receivers since 2017. That was Mike Wallace. That was a long time ago. And it was a run-heavy offense. It was a run-first offense. So it's kind of, I know you're trying to cherry pick some stats here, but that's pretty impressive for Hollywood Brown. I know he was kind of plagued by some drops here, but so was Christian Kirk. And I think it's an upgrade. Christian Kirk had not one, but two opportunities to kind of step up when receivers were out in this offense, and he just never did. He had some nice numbers. He never eclipsed 1,000 yards. But I think that Hollywood Brown, you couldn't have found a better kind of receiver to play wide receiver one in the interim for the Arizona Cardinals than him right now. It just fits. It's something that they can pick up the rapport without much game time together, without any going into week one. And he can be a game breaker. He's just got elite speed, and he can get out there, and he's a hard worker, and you know what to expect with him and Kyler. So I think it's going to be something to really watch in the first 6 weeks of the season. And then beyond that, when you have the decoy of DeAndre Hopkins, what can Hollywood Brown for the first time play with a playmaker that you have to kind of keep, tabs on, like Nuke Hopkins? It's going to be pretty scary, but they've got to tread water those first 6 weeks. It's going to be key. So there's a lot of pressure on that duo early on.
Mike, take it away.
Yeah, so Bo, going back to the defensive side of things, and we go to the cornerback position where we hear a lot of concerning things in terms of cornerback Antonio Hamilton, what's going on there in terms of his injury status, and at the same time, the Cardinals still making cuts across the position throughout training camp. And how concerning is the secondary group right now for the Cardinals?
We're at DEFCON levels. I mean, as far as concern goes for that position, like, can you guys play corner? Like, have you heard from general manager Steve Keim? Is he interested in you? Like, it's crazy. Like, it's the position that they've cut the most roster spots from before of course the deadline is tomorrow. I don't know what they're going to do. You mentioned Antonio Hamilton. Like, it's I asked Cliff, I was like, hey, I noticed Hamilton wasn't out there. He said he was at a doctor's appointment. It wasn't like, hey, he's hurt. Like, and he's been candid as far as a couple of the other injuries on this team, but he said he had a doctor's appointment. So I don't know what that means. Like, was he having his yearly physical? Like, was he taking his kid to the office? But it sounds like he is nursing an injury. And Cliff was kind of snapped back at some reporters while they were in Tennessee and said, we'll tell you when we have to tell you week one, when there's an official injury report. So that's very interesting. Yeah. And he said that, Hamilton had his grasp on the cornerback 2 position opposite Byron Murphy, who they like to play inside more. He's forced the outside just by necessity. We're probably going to see Isaiah Simmons, the versatile linebacker who came out of Clemson, who played at a high level there for the Tigers. He'll probably play some slot corner. He's been practicing with the safeties. But, that's not something that you should feel comfortable with. I would expect them to either trade for a corner. I'm scouring like who would be available, because if there's a team that's trading a serviceable corner at this time of year, they're pretty much giving up on the season. Those aren't things that are just readily available. But there's some interesting like free agent corners available. Robert Alford played for this team he played last year, but he's been on their contract the last 3, battled injuries. He could step in, immediately off the streets and play for this team. But there's got to be some sort of urgency, and I don't see any. And that's the biggest problem with this defense. And that's not to say that this defense isn't, flawed in other spots.
Yeah, that's really tough to see what's going on there. But this is something else too, is that running back, now that Chase Edmonds is gone, James Conner's still there. I'm concerned about the longevity about James Conner, running back 1. And then you look behind him, there's not a lot of experience there. What do you see with this running back group?
I actually am pretty encouraged by it, Joey. It's you've got James Conner, who you, of course, like, to get him just running at the best, highest level possible, he's got to be on a snap count, right? Like, you can't have him go over, say, 70, 75% of the snaps. He had a career high 15 games last year, and he produced the highest production we've seen from him, close to 1,000 yards on the ground, and he had 18 total touchdowns. He was a monster. Like he's money in the bank from the goal line, around the goal line. And, I think that they've got a pretty good stable behind him. Daryl Williams comes over from Kansas City. He had 1,000 scrimmage yards for the Chiefs last year. He'll probably be your primary receiving back. He had over 9 yards per reception last year. So he's a threat out of the backfield catching the football. But I think like between the tackles, they've got a guy, an Eno Benjamin, who they like. He's been in this system for 3 years. He started Arizona State locally here. He's a little bit smaller. He's not the quickest guy, but he seems to grasp a lot of the things that Cliff Kingsbury wants in the pass game, protection part of the game. He'll probably be your more like RB2 between the tackles. And then this kid has really emerged, is a 6th-round pick at a USC via Texas. He played at 2 big programs in his college ranks, in Keontae Ingram. And he really showed that, I think this team really likes him and views him as a potential, 2 down back for this team in the future. I think they'll hold on to him, but I wouldn't imagine him making a big impact early on. But all these guys can catch, all these guys can kind of block, and all these guys can kind of pound it a little bit. So it's a very versatile group. It's just, and James Conner is obviously the best of that group. And if he gets hurt, it's not great, but I think they have some depth there.
Mike, your final one.
Yeah, so final one for me, Bo. What's really your expectations, win-loss for the Cardinals this season? Where do they wind up finishing, or what's really considered a successful season for them in terms of postseason picture?
Yeah, it's back to the postseason. It's a loaded NFC West, as you guys have kind of figured out here, talking to some of the other people who cover these teams. And I think that the Arizona Cardinals, top talent-wise, they have enough to compete. Now, their margin for error as far as injuries concerned, Kyler Murray to DeAndre Hopkins, Hollywood Brown, their offensive line, J.J. Watt, of course, on the defensive side of the football. Those guys need to stay relatively healthy for this thing to really go. Which injuries are inevitable. So, if they come at key spots for this team, it could sink them. And their schedule it's daunting. They play the AFC West, they play the NFC West twice, and they play a second place schedule. So it's, you paid Kyler Murray to be a franchise caliber quarterback. He needs to play like one. And when he has, it's been successful for the Cardinals. So I think that, they approach 10 to 11 victories this upcoming season, but they don't have a lot of margin for error. So if things start to go awry, it could get closer to about 8. But I don't think they'll bottom out. I don't think that they'll be like a 5-win team or a 6-win team. I think they'll be anywhere from 8 to 11 wins, and the ceiling isn't that crazy either. But they've got to be competitive in the playoffs too. Like that Rams loss on Monday Night Football in the wild card round, nobody views that as acceptable. And, to continue this tough trajectory like that Cliff Kingsbury set for himself, getting better each and every year, you don't ever want to stall out, because then, you don't have that to hang your hat on. So it's going to be key for them to continue that. And that would be, being competitive and potentially winning a playoff game.
Ladies and gentlemen, host of the PHNX Cardinals podcast and Arizona Cardinals reporter, Bo Brack. Bo, thank you so much for coming on here tonight. We truly appreciate it, and we hope to have you on at some point soon in the football season.
Let's do it, guys. Loved it.
Absolutely. Thanks so much. And ladies and gentlemen, we'll be back with Cameron De Silva of the USA Today SMG Group Rams Wire in just a few moments right here on episode number 98.